Hello, everybody. Welcome to our UFC 264 preview show. I'm John Pollock, joined by the 1-2 punch that is Phil Chertok and Eric Marcotte. Here on the preview show, Eric, thank you so much for joining us.
Glad to be here.
And Phil, it's always wonderful to speak with you when there is still daylight.
Yeah, I mean, it was raining all day, but getting a minor part in the clouds for this delightful afternoon conversation.
Well, it has been very overcast in the career of Conor McGregor. Will there be sunlight on Saturday night? That is the question that many people are asking in as many ways as possible about Saturday's trilogy between Dustin Poirier and Conor McGregor. I'm going to start off with you, Eric, as we go into Saturday. What is kind of your sense of how big this fight feels several days removed from the fight, and also where Conor McGregor is now starting to come out of the darkness and participate in some media interviews?
So in terms of general interest, the last pay-per-view did, about 1.6 million buys, if I recall reportedly. I think the excitement for this pay-per-view is surpassing that previous one. So honestly, it wouldn't shock me if this one hit 2 million. I think there's a lot of interest going into Saturday night.
I think, Bill, as well, when you're coupling this with the fact that it is going to be a full arena on Saturday in Vegas, there's a big push for this fight. And I think a lot of just general interest, because this is a fight that there's no championship involved, but there are very much stakes on the side of Conor McGregor, which is going to be the power side of this equation on Saturday.
Absolutely. A win, means he's still relevant, and that seems to be something that's important to him. And a loss, I mean, that obviously his star power can always catapult him into big fights, but it's going to be very difficult to take him seriously. And the fact that he would end up on the losing end of one of, the key trilogy so far in his career, that would be pretty devastating to his legacy.
Do you see a parallel, Eric? Everyone is just throwing this back to the Nate Diaz comparison of how Conor came back and immediately wanted the rematch with Nate and having it at 170 pounds. This time around, we're talking 6 months between fights. I am just looking at this, and my biggest question is how much could that Conor McGregor have done in 6 months that is going to reverse the outcome on Saturday?
I understand what people are saying when they talk about the difference between the first and second Nate Diaz fight for Conor McGregor, but I would also caution that was 5 years ago?
Yep.
I mean, a lot's changed. 5 years have passed, and Conor McGregor hasn't been a very active fighter, so I think it's kind of a different scenario. That's not saying that Conor McGregor can't beat Dustin Poirier. He definitely can, but I am still favoring Dustin Poirier going into this one.
Phil, Dustin Poirier is, a favorite on every sports book out there, I think, with complete validation to be going in as this favorite. What is your biggest question here regarding Conor McGregor and how he responds to that loss?
I think for me, it's going to be a combination of factors. The first is, what is the strategy that he's going to use? Because it's not going to be just a matter of, did he prepare to check leg kicks? Because Poirier is going to be aware of that. He's going to be using his footwork differently to potentially exploit what he thinks Conor might be prepared for. So I'm just curious in terms of what Conor is going to do from a strategy and his own footwork perspective to maybe he wants to fight on the inside so that the leg kicks aren't even a factor. So that's what I'm most interested from his perspective. Was there a second part to the question, I thought?
No, I mean, just in terms of what Conor takes from that fight to change things. I think when you really Sorry, I did recall the second point, and it was also he has this history of Dustin Poirier is definitely a 5-round fighter, and even though it was the leg kicks that took him out, you could see the momentum of the fight was also changing throughout, the latter part of the first round. So I think Conor McGregor has a lot to prove, not just in terms of, can he beat Poirier, but how does he handle deep waters? How does he handle fighters that turn up the pace
throughout the 5 rounds. Sorry to cut you off there.
No, absolutely. Cut me off and give out all of your wisdom to all of our listeners.
I'll cut you off right now then. And to add to Phil's point, I think there's a lot of offensive strategies that we'll have to see different from Conor as well. I mean, something that you haven't really seen in his last few fights, Conor McGregor is a phenomenal kicker. He's very talented and creative with his kicks. And I think if he goes particularly to the body, to the legs himself, that could be a huge difference maker in this fight from the last fight, which had a very boxing heavy attack from McGregor.
Conor, I don't know if either of you saw his interview with Stephen A. Smith, but he has an interesting wrinkle to his record that in his mind, taps and decisions, those don't count as losses. Knockouts are definitive. Those are the only losses on his record. So Dustin Poirier does, in fact, hold a victory over Conor McGregor, one of the rare few who holds a win, because none of these submissions or decisions go on the record book. So maybe that will be taken up at the next ABC convention.
The one man beat Conor McGregor, Dustin Poirier. Good on him.
Well, I mean, they can add Sean O'Malley to the list of people with interesting criteria for wins and losses.
So there you have it. I wanted to actually go back all the way to their first meeting in 2014 and just kind of question both of you where you guys saw Conor McGregor at that stage of his career. For those that maybe do not recall, this was only his 3rd fight in the UFC. He had come in with that immediate win over Marcus Brimage and then thrown into a fight with Max Holloway later that summer. He has the knee injury, comes back. Sorry, this would have been the 4th fight with Dustin because he has the Diego Brandao fight. But with Dustin, it's the first pay-per-view fight for Conor McGregor. And this was when there were still all the questions about Conor McGregor. How would he fare against a high-level wrestler? Would he be able to deal with someone with the striking prowess of a Dustin Poirier? But I'll start with you, Phil. What was kind of your estimation of how Conor McGregor was going to ascend at the time in the featherweight division, going into that fight when we had a decent sample, but obviously not what we would see in the years to come?
Yeah, so I was pretty high on Conor. I was impressed with the Max Holloway fight. Even though Holloway wasn't a champion at that point, I was still very high on him. And that was an interesting fight because he controlled it despite an injury with his grappling. So it is very interesting. And then the follow-up, the Diego Brandao fight, no, it wasn't a pay-per-view, but it was a massive event in Ireland built entirely around Conor McGregor, and he delivered he completely delivered. And so the idea of him delivering in a big pay-per-view event, that wasn't the question. The question was, could he go up against this, high-level veteran at that point, Dustin Poirier? And he exceeded my expectations with how he finished. I mean, he must have exceeded everybody's expectations with how he performed in that one.
And that was a fight, Eric, that, I mean, so much of it was about how, like, Conor just systematically broke this guy mentally before that fight ever began. If you watch the embedded leading up to that fight, like, Dustin Poirier is just, this was a guy completely going on fumes into that fight. A very different Dustin Poirier than we're accustomed to seeing today.
Yeah, I'd say perhaps more than any other opponent, Conor's mental warfare, so to say. It definitely got to Dustin, and you saw that in his performance. I remember at the time, even after that, I still wasn't completely sold on Conor, but, when he got in there and he beat up Dennis Seaver, then I knew he was
Dennis Seaver was the decision maker for Eric. It's like, this guy might have some upward mobility. It was an interesting fight for Conor McGregor, and I think it was more so, like, for me, it was very impressive watching the entire surrounding that event in Dublin, Ireland. That here was a guy that we've seen a lot of fighters that sometimes can buckle under the pressure of a giant, large scale event, and there was no bigger card built around one person than Conor in Dublin that previous summer, and it just seemed this was a guy that thrived on that kind of pressure and would follow that up continually. This first fight with Dustin Poirier, I mean, it's not even the main event of that pay-per-view that he deferred to Chris Cariazzo challenging Demetrius Johnson.
Yeah, a stacked card if you want to go back and look at that.
It's an incredible card when you
UFC 178.
Yes. But we fast forward back to this fight, and it's interesting to hear what Conor McGregor is saying going into this fight. He is now stating that with a win, he has plans. He has to fight Charles Oliveira next. So he is eyeing the UFC lightweight championship. This is going to be a fight that I think, honestly, you can go back to the second fight, and Conor landed a great shot on Dustin Poirier in the first round. And I think for the Conor supporters, they can look at this guy can touch Dustin and land. To the supporter of Dustin Poirier, I would say this guy ate Conor's best shot, and he just got stronger as that round continued and then finished him in the second round. I just look at there was too much evidence in that second fight that Conor McGregor has to have changed so much from what I saw in that first fight to have a different outcome here. But this is a guy that power is still there. I just question if that's going to be enough that you can rely on him catching Dustin and finishing him, which would have to be early, I think.
No, yeah, you certainly have a point. I think Dustin has a lot more ways to victory. I think that would be fair to say. He's a bit more of a well-rounded fighter. He can drag into deeper waters. But I don't think necessarily this fight will look exactly like the last one either. I mean, if we look at, I'm trying to think of a recent trilogy or pair of fights. Let's go with DC versus Stipe Miocic, for example. 3 different fights in a relatively close amount of time. And all of them played out very differently. I think Conor McGregor and Dustin Poirier are both high enough level fighters who both have the ability to make adjustments between camps mid-fights, that this could look very different depending on McGregor's offensive strategy as well as Poirier's. But kind of like we talked about earlier, yeah, I think Poirier just has more ways to win, and that makes me lean towards him if I were to put some money down on it.
Phil, are you going to take the prop on Conor McGregor by submission?
Well, then, I mean, that's not a victory, right? He only goes for victories.
That's right. That's right. That would be against his credo. So I don't know if we will be seeing any Conor McGregor submission attempts. Do you think that wrestling is going to play a bigger factor for Dustin in this fight? To either of you?
I think that the clinch, I'm interested to see how the clinch plays out, because I think that, Conor's going to either want to be inside or outside. I don't think he's going to want to be at sort of that mid-range here. Conor's a pretty good wrestler. He got taken down last time, but I don't think he was expecting it. It will be a factor because Poirier's strategy, I think, will be to mix it up, not just focus on boxing or kickboxing or leg kicks or any of that. I think putting together a well-rounded attack is what's going to allow him to ensure that Conor fades throughout the fight and he picks it up.
Yeah, I'd agree with that take. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me at all to see Dustin wrestle a bit more. But Conor's a really strong defensive grappler. It's easier said than done to just go in there and wrestle him for 5 rounds. And I don't know if Poirier is a very skilled grappler, has very good jiu-jitsu, but I don't know if he really has the wrestling to just take Conor down and control him for the entirety of the fight. It can certainly play a role in it, but I don't think it will decide it, especially if we get a finish.
Yes. In terms of, outcomes here, Conor McGregor is fighting for a championship. I think this all but would guarantee a title fight for Dustin Poirier, but in the current landscape of UFC, I don't guarantee anything. If we suppose that Conor McGregor loses this fight, and in convincing fashion, if this is a real Conor McGregor loss on Saturday, there are still plenty of fights to make with Conor McGregor, but a big narrative going into this is that is this sort of a referendum on Conor McGregor as an elite level lightweight? And I would say the loss to Poirier, nothing to me completely eliminates Conor McGregor from a championship situation. But when we're talking about like that, those top 3-4 lightweights, I think this does remove Conor McGregor from that conversation of just pure skill set of where the game is versus where Conor McGregor is. Is that what is riding on this fight, Eric?
I think there's certainly some truth to that. I think it's actually really hard to judge where McGregor stands up to the rest of the division. I mean, technically, he has like 1 win in the last 5 years, which isn't an incredibly impressive statistic. But when you see him fight, you can see that he's still a very high-level fighter. it's just hard to say exactly what would be next for him, especially after a loss. Dustin Poirier might be the best lightweight in the world. With no disrespect to Charles Oliveira, I don't think that's a crazy claim. So where does Conor stand up against the rest of the elite level division? I guess we'll find out one way or the other.
And what is the motivating factor if you are not looking at a championship fight? I mean, the Nate Diaz fight is just going to circulate throughout for the rest of their careers until that third fight happens. I think win or lose, people are going to talk about that fight, but that will certainly intensify with a loss, Phil.
Yeah, I think that's a fight that people will always want to see. I think there are lots of other big fights out there. If Conor loses badly, maybe a fight versus Jorge Masvidal makes more sense than a fight versus Nate Diaz. I definitely think he'll continue to have big fights. It doesn't have to be a win for him to, sort of establish himself as, an elite lightweight, just as Eric was saying, because he has fought so infrequently and because he's only fighting the best of the best, it's like if he loses to Poirier, in a competitive fight, then maybe that's enough to tell us that he still deserves to be fighting, Justin Gaethje or somebody else who's really close to a title shot to maybe, get a spot back in there. But if he loses badly, it's a tougher sell, but again, he's still fighting so infrequently, and it's still the top guys.
What if there were a scenario where Conor tapped due to strikes? Would that be a loss in Conor's
I think that's listed as a TKO, so questionable, but he'll let us know.
Okay. I want to talk about some of the other fights. A really interesting fight at welterweight between Gilbert Burns, who is coming off that loss to Kamaru Usman earlier this year in February, and Stephen Thompson, who fought for the championship twice against Tyron Woodley. He is now 38 years of age, still looks 18, and has now been competing in the UFC for 9 years. I think it's a very important fight for Stephen Thompson. Also a tough position that Gilbert Burns is in, because I would say he's in a role where he certainly can derail any championship opportunity for Thompson. But a win, I don't care how impressive it looks. There are just so many contenders at welterweight that I do not see Burns getting another opportunity while Usman is champion, unless it were extremely important circumstances where there was some kind of an injury or something along those lines. So it's a very interesting fight, but I would say, Phil, this is a very, very important fight for Stephen Thompson if he has any hopes of fighting for a championship, because I just look at the age and I don't think he can come back after a loss to get back to that picture.
Yeah, I totally agree. And while, the welterweight title picture, it does seem like the UFC is trying to zero in on a Covington fight with Usman, there's not really anybody after that. So, obviously there's Leon Edwards out there who
the most
totally
forgotten man in this division.
He deserves
no
a
one
title
even thinks
shot,
about this guy. He might as well have lost to Nate Diaz.
Well, it's the unfortunate reality. So I think this really sets up a fight versus him for Thompson, and the winner of that is going to get the title shot. And you're right, age is definitely a factor. He's looked great throughout the years. I think it was the last fight against Luque. That was a terrific performance.
Yeah, Jeff Neal. After that.
Jeff Neal. That's right. And that was a great one too, right? And Neal was, highly regarded, up and coming, vicious guy, and he neutralized him completely. And the Luque fight that I mentioned, the only bad loss was the Pettis one, and it was, I think he just misjudged that strike because he was controlling that fight. So it's pretty unfortunate, I think, for him, because I think he deserves a title shot as well. And you're right, it's a bit away, but I think a win here and then potentially that fight with Leon Edwards, and he does get that title shot.
An interesting stat here is for Stephen Thompson, 78% takedown defense. And I think that's going to be an area that's going to be very important in this fight. And when you take that percentage over all of the fights Stephen Thompson has had, I think that's a very interesting statistic to throw out there. Where do you think this fight is going to be, contested, Eric? Like, do you look at Gilbert Burns here as somebody that has that ability to take this into his department on the ground?
I think this fight's probably going to take place largely on the feet, even though Wonderboy is obviously the much more accomplished striker. I think Burns is probably pretty confident in his hands at this point in his career. I wouldn't be surprised if he tries to beat up that lead leg of Wonderboy and try to catch him with one of those big, powerful hooks of his. If it does go to the ground, yeah, obviously Gilbert Burns he might be the best in the entire division on the ground, with all due respect to Damian Maia. But I don't think that's going to be his game plan. I think he's going to try to keep it on the feet.
It's a very important fight. I think with Stephen Thompson, I favor him in this fight. Mainly, I'm going a lot off of the performances he's had. Like, there's not too many guys that have looked that good against Vicente Luque and also Jeff Neal. Like, these are very solid performances from Stephen Thompson. And again, I just see there's a lot riding on the line for him. But I'm always curious about how a fighter like a Gilbert Burns bounces back after a really tough loss where you have fought for the championship, come up short, and now it's life after that title shot. Like, you're looking at a very long road back to that. If that is what's, motivating your career, like that's a long road for a Gilbert Burns to get back to.
Yeah, it was a pretty decisive loss, although he did have Usman in some trouble in the first round, but he's not that name that's going to, just get himself thrown right back into title contention. He's going to need to go on a streak to get back there.
Also on the main card is a heavyweight fight between Greg Hardy and Tai Tuivasa.
Oh, God.
Here are some numbers for everybody, okay? So Tai Tuivasa, 92% of his wins have been by knockout or TKO, 86% for Greg Hardy. We have average fight times of just around 7.5 minutes for each. Tai Tuivasa, 4.42 strikes landed per minute and absorbs 3.06 per minute. For Greg Hardy, 3.88 strikes landed per minute, 2.41 that he absorbs. I look at this fight, this is two guys being thrown in there to just avoid Greg Hardy having to worry about any kind of wrestling, any kind of defense off of his back, and just to have a wild heavyweight brawl, and we see who the winner is. Because I think we're getting right to me, like, the end of the quote unquote Greg Hardy experiment is now several years old. And this is a fight that I would say at this point, like, a loss here, like, where are we really going with Greg Hardy other than being this like heavyweight novelty?
He's coming off his first stoppage loss against, who was Marcin Tybura.
Yep.
Tai Tuivasa recently cut, but hey, he came back and he's put a couple wins together. I'd be lying if I said I was looking forward to this fight, but hopefully we get an explosive finish quickly.
Is this just going to be a brawl, Phil? Or maybe we're going to get the parlay of Conor and Greg Hardy by submission in the same night? What would that be? I think you could retire if you pulled that one off.
Oh, you know what? Greg Hardy's ground game might be better than Tai Tuivasa's.
Greg Hardy could land like just some wild, like, it's called a guillotine, but it looks nothing like a guillotine. It's just one of those where it was like maybe we'll see
modified
blank. That's
what that kind of shit that only happens at heavyweight.
Yes.
Maybe we'll see a Hurricane Rana in this heavyweight MMA fight.
Will we see an inhaler in this fight?
That's a good
just take it all.
I think, I don't know. I'm worried about this one. Because Tybura should beat him. So he should beat Hardy. So
yes.
Tuivasa. Sorry, I'm looking at the previous fight he had. Tuivasa should definitely beat him. But so I think I'm worried that Hardy's going to just like play it safe. And this is going to be a not fun heavyweight scrap. But I hope I'm wrong. I really hope I'm wrong. It's definitely set up to be what you described, John.
Maybe
also,
we'll get a nice shoey at the end of it.
Oh, we can only hope, can't we? COVID's winding down, so what better time than to just share shoes full of alcohol and down them? What possible diseases could we discover now in a post or at least semi-post COVID world?
Tai Tuivasa doesn't strike me as somebody who's concerned about much of anything, actually.
Well, why not? The main card rounds out with Irene Aldana versus Yana Kunitskaya at 135 pounds. And Sean O'Malley returns, and he's got a replacement opponent in the debuting Kris Moutinho, who is obviously an enormous underdog. This is the largest disparity betting-wise. Sean O'Malley, a massive favorite. Moutinho has stated outright, I am not guaranteeing a win. I'm not guaranteeing a loss. But I am guaranteeing fight of the night. And I think this guy, listen, this is his entryway into the UFC. He's helping UFC keep Sean O'Malley on this card with the hopes that, hey, I'll get a full camp for my next one. But I mean, there's no pressure on this guy. But I don't know, if we should expect any kind of upset here. Sean O'Malley, a massive favorite. But someone they obviously wanted on this card with a lot of eyes on it.
Yeah, they made a point to have him on the last McGregor event as well. So, they're keeping this duo together. And yeah, they clearly want to push him, and they want to see him in big wins under the bright lights. And so, yeah, that's why they gave him this name as opposed to somebody a little bit higher up the food chain.
You know who quietly ends up on a lot of these huge cards? It's Stephen Thompson. Like, he has found himself, like, if you look at some of these MSG shows, Conor fights, like, Stephen Thompson, like, gets his way into, like, a lot of these cards. He fought on the George St. Pierre, Michael Bisping card. He was on the Nate Diaz, Jorge Masvidal card. He was, 205 is when he challenged, Tyron Woodley. It's like, this guy gets on all these cards that you maybe, don't think of off the top of your head. He was on that 178 card, the legendary UFC 178.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, Patrick Cote.
Patrick Cote.
Yes. He was on the Jones Evans card. Like, this guy.
Oh, man.
They get him some FaceTime here. He was on he headlined the legendary Fight Night card in Ottawa with Roy McDonald.
Legendary.
Every Ottawa native still talks about that night in 2016. Legendary night. I wanted to ask specifically you, Phil. You have been a longtime Ryan Hall supporter, and he is making one of his rare appearances in the Octagon on Saturday night, and he's taking on a fighter by the name of Ilia Topuria, who is 2-0 thus far in the UFC with wins over Yusuf Zalal and Damon Jackson. And he is a pretty sizable favorite here over Ryan Hall, who is unbeaten, but has not fought since July of 2019 when he beat Darren Elkins. Ryan Hall is not for everyone. I love watching this guy compete, but this is like a really interesting fight to watch on Saturday because I think Ryan Hall is such a difficult opponent, to deal with, and Ilia Topuria, at least odds makers, see him as a big favorite in this fight.
Yeah, I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that Hall hasn't fought in so long, independent of, the fact that a lot of that is because people just don't want to fight him. And it appears like he has only one way to win, right? And that's his jiu-jitsu. And that is true. I mean, he's not typically going to beat people with strikes, even though he does throw a fair bit of volume. But
Conor and Greg Hardy by submission and Ryan Hall by head kick knockout.
But he is so creative with that jiu-jitsu that he has a ton of ways to win, particularly with creative leg locks. And his opponent Ilia Topuria has looked really good in his a couple of UFC fights, and he's undefeated and is well-rounded, so I can understand. But I just don't. It's very challenging to find training partners like Ryan Hall, even people who are good at leg locks. He's just so creative at setting them up. So I almost see any fight with Ryan Hall as a pick'em at this point. So I'm definitely really intrigued by that fight, and I'm looking forward to it, and looking forward to Ryan Hall's expressionless face.
What else on the prelims are of interest to you, Eric?
I mean, we should talk about the real main event of UFC 264 here. Niko Price against Michel Pereira, because oh my god, I love it.
This is just going to be
should be 5 rounds.
This will be a video game.
Exactly. That's who both of these guys are, and this is a lock for fight of the night. Not a chance it goes to something else. Not a chance.
I don't know. Carlos Condit has a history of fight of the nights, and he is going up against Max Griffin, who's a pretty exciting fighter. So I could see that surpassing Michel Pereira.
Oh, come on. Carlos Condit's last fight of the night was like 7 years ago. I love Carlos Condit, but it's been a rough few years, man.
Well, there's a certain age bracket that Carlos Condit is fighting now. I mean, he's got the wins over Court McGee and Matt Brown. He's actually riding a win streak going into this. And now he's fighting 35-year-old Max Griffin. So, I mean, this was not too many people come back after 5 losses, but here we are with Carlos Condit, who amazingly we could be talking about a 3-fight win streak after Saturday.
Hey, he might find himself in this new, older version of the welterweight division with names like Robbie Lawler and Nick Diaz set to meet later in the year.
How much do you like that fight for Nick Diaz in September?
Yeah, I think if Nick Diaz is coming back to fight, I think Robbie Lawler is actually the perfect person to put him against.
I like it a lot. I think that's, I mean, it's playing to strengths. I think there's going to be such a buzz for Nick Diaz. And I mean, here's a guy that has not fought it'll be almost 7 years by the time he fights, which is just ridiculous.
And his last win was what? Like
BJ Penn?
BJ Penn. Oh my.
Dude,
was like
we're literally,
maybe?
That will almost be exactly a decade after the BJ Penn fight. That was October 2011 if he fights in September. That's insane.
I think the projected odds have Lawler as a bit of a favorite right now, but Robbie's looked very gun shy for his last 3 or 4 fights.
I'd take Nick in the fight.
I don't think that's a crazy take at all.
I just don't know what you can possibly expect from Nick Diaz. I mean, yes.
I don't know either, yeah.
I mean, he hasn't been destroying himself for 7 years fighting, but I mean, Jesus. That's a total just shot in the dark novelty that you are enamored to see Nick Diaz fight, but I don't know what to possibly expect in that fight. But it's a lot more interesting to me seeing him in a fight like that with Robbie Lawler than putting him against like a top welterweight. That I just think, what fun is that? I don't think the audience you're attracting, I don't think they want to see Nick Diaz just throw into the wolves, which I think that is what it would be if he was put against a top 5 welterweight.
Agreed. I think that would be pretty gross. I think if we're looking at a big comeback fight for Nick Diaz, Robbie Lawler was the perfect name. There's guys that we just talked about. You can always run it back with Condit or a fight against Matt Brown or something. But I think in terms of name value, their history, I think Robbie Lawler was just that's perfect matchmaking.
Where are you, Phil, on the next month's pay-per-view, which will now be headlined by Derek Lewis and Cyril Gane for the interim heavyweight championship?
I mean, it's not a terribly compelling title fight. It's a nice fight to determine a number 1 contender. If you ask me, I mean,
could they have just done that? Like, I really disagree when the UFC clearly has this belief that a main event has to have a title attached to it. And I will argue until I'm dead that no fan cares about an interim title. Nobody. You cannot quiz anybody that's going to have a list of their favorite interim championship reigns off the top of their head. Nobody cares. You could have just done this 5-round fight and it's a number 1 contender fight. And I'll go further that as a result of this, there are two outcomes. Number 1 is that this is going to further delay any potential of John Jones fighting Francis Ngannou. So the fans lose in that sense. The other end of it is that they come to an agreement with John Jones, who is going to fight Ngannou, and then this interim title is completely worthless and just off to the side as this stupid distraction. It's just a complete waste having a belt here. Just do this fight. You can do a 5-round non-title fight and call it what it is. Number 1 contender fight.
100%. And they have a title fight on that card already as well.
They do. Amanda Nunes is fighting.
So
this pay-per-view is going to do identical whether there is an interim title or no interim title. Identical.
Who wants a fucking 5-round Derek Lewis fight anyways?
I think, yeah. So I agree with what you're all saying. I think part of it has to do, this is in Houston as well, right? And so they want Derek Lewis as the main event. And so that plays a little bit of a factor.
But again, put him on the card. We don't need an interim title.
I guess they just figured it was weird to put him in the main event without it being a title, right? Like, I don't know. Like, I agree with you. It's silly. I don't really quite understand it entirely, but I mean, we see it in boxing as well. There always has to be a belt. I mean, even when Conor fought Floyd and Floyd fought Logan Paul, there was some type of belt on the line. There seems to be this fixation. No, of course I can't. But I know.
It means nothing. Not one person has bought a recent Floyd fight because of the title that they are fighting for.
No, I agree with that. It's not the difference in somebody purchasing it, but it's part of the visual spectacle. It's something that the promoters want to see as part of the build-up. They want people to think that it's an important.
Fight for the King of Houston title. Create the King of Houston championship. Okay.
Sure.
The King of Houston, Cyril Gahn. What a night!
Right. There's ultimately, there's so many cameras. Somebody takes a picture. You want a shiny belt in the picture because it makes it look shiny and important.
Please,
the whole fight.
Give him a trophy. Give him a jacket. Give him a ring. Anyway, that's UFC 265, folks, for the interim championship. Anything else as we wind this down that you are looking at? I know, Phil, you are very excited. It's the return of Brad Tavares against Omari Akhmedov on the early prelims.
The earlier the better. The more prelim fights, that's all I'm excited for on these UFC pay-per-views, and back in Vegas, so full crowd. I mean, that should be pretty interesting to see a full crowd reaction for Conor.
I love the selling points. Like when you hear Dana, like if you watch all these interviews he does, like he's got his talking points in all these interviews, and the big hard sell for this pay-per-view is most celebrities at a UFC event in history. There has never been more celebrities, as though I'm the fan at home that is considering buying this show. You know what? There's going to be a lot of celebrities on this pay-per-view. I'm putting down my $70. I think that is going to be the deciding factor. Now that if you can quantify the amount of celebrity cutaways we're going to see, including our favorite Machine Gun Kelly that will be there.
That was my second favorite.
Yeah. I mean, a real fan in Machine Gun Kelly, all jokes aside, but nonetheless. And I guess Donald Trump will be there on Saturday.
Will he? What?
Yeah, he'll be there.
I did not hear that.
They gave out an entire list of celebrities who was going to be. It's completely ridiculous. It was like Kevin Durant.
I did not know that at all. Wow.
So that's coming up Saturday night, folks. If you want to follow along with all of the post-wrestling listeners, the place to be is in the Discord chat where Phil and Eric will be active. I will be lurking. You can vote, make your fight picks. I find that you guys have a cool system there to get in all your votes. Make fight picks right on the spot. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. So we have, usually during the intros, Eric will set up a little poll where you can pick the winner of the next fight. And when that's over, you get some points. But we also keep track of everybody's wins and losses. And so we have a leaderboard as well, which I think Eric is on top of, as he has been for a while. And we'll be resetting that leaderboard at the end of the year. But it's a fun way to keep track of the fight and even get interest in some fights that you may not regularly pay attention to. And so it just adds a little bit more excitement and chat in the Discord. And it's something that is a lot of fun. And so people should join postwrestling.com/Discord if they have not already.
There you go. Postwrestling.com/Discord. And then Phil and I will be live right after the main event. You can watch at our YouTube channel, youtube.com/postwrestling. We'll be running through all of the fights. Eric will have a report up on the site. And I'll end with this announcement that we are planning to do our next post show, our first ever Bellator post show. And I actually announced this on a recent show, and I announced that Eric was going to be on the post show with us. I had not formally asked Eric if he was even around that night. But I hope you can join us, Eric. If
there was no formal asking. There was not even any discussion. I was in the Zoom room as that happened, and I go onto the Discord and I messaged Phil and I said, Phil, is this a thing? Were you told about this?
I remember that I talked about it, but I guess I only spoke about it with Phil, and by extension, I just assume you two are like attached at the hip, that the message would get to the other. But that was on me. I kind of booked you publicly to appear on this Bellator post show. I definitely do want to do a preview for that one because I imagine there is a lot less followers of Bellator, but this is a huge card. I'm very excited for this fight with Pitbull and AJ McKee. That's on July 31st, right at the end of the month.
Yeah, this card is great and definitely post show and preview show worthy.
Yes. Phil?
Yeah, I mean, look, McKee is this up and coming guy who has all the star potential in the world. Showtime was promoting him heavily over the course of the boxing events recently, giving him a lot of airtime. He was sitting ringside with Steven Espinoza. So I think that they have a lot invested in him. I was a bit conflicted because Askar Askarov was fighting the same night, but unfortunately, he's had to pull out of his fight. But fortunately for me, I can devote all my attention to Bellator that night. And I look forward to the preview and the post show.
Last question is for you, Eric. PFL is kind of at their break period before the playoffs start, but you've been following it. I've been really interested with this current season. I think it's got the most interest that PFL has had so far, but just what are some of your overall thoughts as they get set for the playoffs and what they have going for them? I think the format has now, like, people are used to it. It's clicked and it's something different, and I think it's kind of intriguing.
Yeah, in terms of interest, I think bringing in some of those established UFC names definitely carried over to a bit more general interest this year. Plus, not having any events last year kind of left a bit of that longing there, right? So people are looking forward to it a bit more. And interestingly enough, of those big names that signed with the PFL, which I would encompass as Fabricio Verdum, Anthony Pettis, and Rory McDonald, it's only McDonald who's going into the playoff period now. So I'll be really interested to see the interest in this as it progresses. I think
Lance Palmer lost both his fights. Like, he would have probably been most people's favorite to win a third tournament, and he's not even in the playoffs. So you've had some unpredictability that's helped as well if you've been following.
It's certainly a fun and very unique format to anything else that's going on in MMA. And when the UFC runs basically every single week, I think you have to do something as a promotion to distinguish yourself and stand out from the pack. And I think the PFL has done that pretty well.
One thing I'll say about the PFL that it does well with its format, even though I find a little bit of it to be a tad confusing, is that it gives you something to look forward to for these fighters. Even if you don't know, which you probably don't know most of these fighters, okay, they're going to be in the playoffs. They're going to be going up against one of these guys. So it allows the viewer to form a relationship with the season or the series to that effect. And I think, to your point, Eric, that distinguishes it from other MMA brands, and especially from the UFC, who runs fight nights every weekend. They all bleed into each other. You can't tell the difference between one fight night from another a lot of the times in terms of which fight was on there and who fought who and where did it take place at the Apex, of course, right? So I think that is something that PFL does well and has served them well this year.
It's a great point. Go ahead, Eric.
The first fight on the first episode of their prelims moving forward, every fight has meaning, even if you don't know the people. It has as much significance as the main event does in terms of their point structure. So as a viewer, it can convince you to tune into something that you might not otherwise. And not too many other big promotions do that quite as well. I think One Championship definitely has something going where or is it One FC now? I never remember. They definitely have something going where they mix in different kinds of combat sports throughout the card. But you look at most promotions, it's just straight up MMA throughout the most part. And I think the PFL, they're definitely making a name for themselves, and I think it's going to be even bigger next year.
All right. Well, maybe there will be a PFL post show before the end of the year. Who knows? But do follow along with all of our coverage on Saturday night. Again, we are live right after the main event ends, youtube.com/postwrestling. And you can follow all night long at postwrestling.com/Discord. So check all of that great stuff out. Phil, where can people follow you and all of your thoughts?
Just reach out on the Discord. That's the best place right now. That's where we hang out. We're still doing our Twin Peaks watch along. There's always exciting events. We actually have a member of the Discord, Dickie Bird. He's running a series on Twitch where he is playing this incredible squad-based game, XCOM, and he's made all these members of the Post community as characters. John, you're in there as our top scientist. Eric's in there kicking butt. I'm in there as a robot on the prowl. It's a lot of fun. It's Mondays and Wednesdays, so you can find out more if you join the Discord. There's always something going on. So, postwrestling.com/Discord.
And Eric, where can we follow you?
You know what? You can follow me anywhere. I'm everywhere. I'm in the Discord. I'm on Twitter. I'm on the forum. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. Just track me down. I'm there.
Track him down. Eric Marcotte. He'll give out his home address one of these shows.
Yeah,
all right.
Come out to Sudbury.
That is it for us. Thank you for listening to our UFC 264 preview show.